Russia is making a determined play to demonstrate its power. Its eyes are set on the Arctic, a region of untapped potential, where it has been quietly, yet strategically, strengthening its position.
It's a bit like a game of chess. Everyone's moving their pawns. The Russians are setting up bases to display their power.
New ports are springing up, military installations are making an ominous appearance, and even floating nuclear power plants are supplying power to the most distant reaches of human civilization.
If Putin doesn't exploit the Russian Arctic, he won't stay in power.
Every move is meticulously calculated to project power, and in ways both subtle and overt, to support its war efforts.
Russia has already lost this war.
At the heart of this intoxicating power play is Svalbard, an archipelago that has been a symbol of peaceful coexistence between the East and the West for almost a century. Home to a fragile ecosystem and a harmonious blend of cultures, Svalbard is now becoming a microcosm for the new Cold War.
Many fear their peaceful coexistence is at risk.
Will Svalbard remain untouched by conflict? Or is it too important in Russia's grand strategy in the Arctic? Let's find out. This is the Svalbard archipelago, located some 650 kilometers north of mainland Norway, a stunning polar region that spans some 61,000 square kilometers, making it larger than Switzerland and Belgium. The most notable characteristics of the archipelago is its permafrost and ice-filled terrain, featuring more than 2,100 glaciers and polar bears, which are more common than people. The main settlements of Svalbard include Longyearbyen, the administrative center of Svalbard, a mostly Norwegian settlement that houses the majority of the population of some 2,400 people and provides all the basic amenities, and even has the northernmost university in the world. And it is the northernmost settlement in the world, with over 1,000 inhabitants. Also, Longyearbyen has an over-average share of its population between 25 and 44 years old, but nearly no residents over 66. That may have something to do with the law which prohibits people from dying there. Individuals who are terminally ill are required to leave the island to spend their last days elsewhere. Even pregnant women are encouraged to travel before their due date to avoid complications. This is because the low temperatures and permafrost prevent bodies from decomposing properly, which can lead to the spread of diseases. This discovery prompted the ban on burials in 1950 to protect the local population from potential health risks. Barentsburg is the second largest settlement, historically a Russian mining town. While its industry has declined, Barentsburg is attempting to reinvent itself as a tourist destination. It has roughly 455 permanent inhabitants. Ny-Ålesund has a community of international Arctic researchers, and it's considered the northernmost functional civilian settlement in the world, and has a population of up to 117 in the summer and 35 in the winter. Pyramiden is also a notable but largely abandoned Soviet coal mining town, which has become a tourist curiosity. After all, it has the world's northernmost Lenin statue, and it used to be the largest town on Svalbard. There have been other settlements, but all have either been abandoned or are temporary research stations. No roads connect these settlements. Instead, snowmobiles, aircraft, and boats provide means of transportation. So if there are towns owned by different nationalities, who exactly owns Svalbard? Before 1920, Svalbard was viewed by the international community as a no man's land that didn't fall under the jurisdiction of any specific nation, floating in a sort of geopolitical limbo, only visited by some Arctic explorers and coal miners, with sporadic, failed attempts to industrialize and colonize. Things started to shift as Norway, Sweden, and Russia began negotiations to share administrative control of Svalbard. They were in the thick of these discussions when the outbreak of World War I and the Russian Civil War put a sudden halt to their plans. Negotiations resumed in 1918, where Norway and Sweden seized the opportunity presented by Russia's absence and decided to proceed without them. So in 1920, the Svalbard Treaty was signed, formally assigning sovereignty over the Svalbard archipelago to Norway. It also set out the following rules. Taxes are to be collected to sustain Svalbard and its government only, with separate budgets from mainland Norway. Norway is obliged to preserve the Svalbard environment. Residents and companies from treaty signatory nations have equal access to Svalbard, with the right to engage in various activities. They must follow Norwegian law, but discrimination based on nationality is prohibited, and the prohibition of military usage. No naval bases or fortifications are to be built on this archipelago. As a result, Svalbard is not part of geographical Norway, but rather forms an unincorporated area, and as such is not a part of the Schengen zone or the European Union. This means that technically, no one is required to have a visa or residence permit to live on Svalbard. The Svalbard Treaty grants treaty nationals equal right of abode, same as those of Norwegian nationals. And so far, non-treaty nationals have been admitted visa-free as well. The government may still expel a person who does not have the means to live on the island, so there are caveats. And in practice, you will probably need a Schengen visa to get there, since there are no flights going to Svalbard from anywhere other than mainland Norway. Going back to the 1930s, now the Soviet Union signed the treaty, and soon afterwards it began its investments. Pyramiden and Barentsburg were initially established by Swedish and Dutch mining companies during the 1910s and 20s. However, the Soviet Union purchased them, and so the management of these towns was transferred to Trust Arctic Ugol, a Soviet coal mining company. The Soviet government provided amenities like schools, hospitals, and sports facilities. Before the rail connections between the Kola Peninsula and the rest of Russia became operational, Svalbard served as a vital source of coal that powered the northern cities such as Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. So the Russian settlements on Svalbard during their initial stages of development were purely economic ventures rather than strategic or political outposts. By the later half of the Soviet era, these towns, especially Pyramiden, started to symbolize the Soviet Union's ideal utopia. This transformation was not accidental, but a deliberate effort to demonstrate the USSR's power and capabilities to the world, given that these towns were amongst the very few Soviet outposts beyond the Iron Curtain. The township of Pyramiden was well equipped and almost self-sustaining. These Russian towns were pretty great places to live, possibly even better than mainland Russia. But the prosperity of the Soviet mines in Svalbard was short-lived, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Trust Arctic Ugol was hemorrhaging money. The coal extract was of inferior quality and unprofitable. The company struggled to financially support both settlements without the support of the state. Many workers lost their jobs. Schools were shut down and children were sent back home. Eventually, the town of Pyramiden was completely deserted. After the miners' families were repatriated in 1994, the atmosphere in both settlements turned increasingly dismal, made worse by numerous accidents in the mines. On August 29, 1996, a plane crash near Longyearbyen resulted in the death of 141 Arctic Ugol employees, equating to nearly 10% of Pyramiden's population at the time. By 1998, the decision was made to abandon Pyramiden. Now, Barentsburg has been left as the main Russian foothold in Svalbard.
And so, if there isn't much money to be made from resource extraction, why are the Russians here?
Severomorsk, situated on the Kola Peninsula, harbors Russia's strategic nuclear submarines, a linchpin in the country's naval defense and nuclear deterrence strategy. What amplifies Svalbard's importance is its potential to control access to and from these critical naval bases. In times of crisis, the archipelago could play a pivotal role in shaping Arctic security and power dynamics. Beyond its strategic positioning, the waters surrounding Svalbard are a treasure trove of natural resources, abundant fish stocks, extensive deposits of metals and minerals. The harsh Arctic conditions and sovereignty issues complicate resource extraction. Yet successfully navigating these complexities could not only boost the local economy, but also attract international interests. Climate change is altering the Arctic landscape. Melting ice is poised to increase shipping activity, enhancing the strategic importance of Svalbard. Beyond controlling access to Russia's northern fleet, this could potentially open up new shipping routes and economic opportunities. Historically, concerns about Svalbard's role in a large-scale Arctic conflict have lingered, particularly during periods of East-West tensions. In the Cold War era, the Soviet Union fretted over the potential military use of Svalbard. They insisted on strict adherence to the treaty's ban on the island's use for war purposes. The Soviets envisioned seizing control of Svalbard swiftly in the event of war, restricting NATO and using it as a base to safeguard their nuclear assets around the Kola Peninsula. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the once amicable relationship between the predominantly Russian and Ukrainian residents of Barentsburg and their Norwegian neighbors has transformed into an icy standoff. On 9th of May, a day celebrated in Russia as a commemoration of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany, the Russian General Consul led a parade of dozens of vehicles accompanied by a helicopter proudly displaying Russian flags through the town of Barentsburg. The presence of actual military personnel would of course not have been legal due to the Svalbard Treaty. Meanwhile, in the abandoned Soviet coal mining settlement of Pyramiden, a bulldozer was photographed flying the separatist flag of the Donetsk People's Republic, which is an internationally unrecognized republic of Russia in the occupied region of eastern Ukraine's Donetsk Oblast. A few months later, Russian officials took to the waters of Norwegian territory, conducting a Navy Day parade with a small flotilla of boats. More recently, a 7-meter Orthodox cross was erected near Barentsburg. As usual, the Russian mining company Trost Arctic Ugel was behind this move. St. George's ribbon decorated the cross. The ribbon originated as a symbol of commemoration for veterans of the Eastern Front of the Second World War. In recent years, the ribbon has become associated with pro-Russian and separatist sentiment, as Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine have been seen wearing the ribbon. It has become a symbol of Russian military glory. Arctic Ugel also announced its plans to introduce charter flights from Russia to Svalbard, aimed at bringing tourists to the region. However, the company's aspirations faced hurdles when the exemption granted for a single flight in September was exclusively for company employees, not tourists, to ensure staff rotation and uninterrupted operations. The company must seek individual permission for each subsequent charter flight. Furthermore, the Tourist Board of Svalbard decided to exclude Trost Arctic Ugel from membership, and they're thinking about advising their member businesses to stop buying services from Russian government-owned companies. This could result in fewer tourists visiting Russian settlements or promotional trips to areas owned by the Russian state. If this decision gets the green light, it could greatly heighten the isolation of Russian communities in Svalbard. Finally, as a result of the growing unease, a significant number of Ukrainians have chosen to leave Barentsburg. Reports indicate that more than 12% of the population of Barentsburg have left Svalbard, some of them seeking refuge in Europe. While for some time, Svalbard was a safe haven, isolated from the politics of the mainland, it seems that the war has caught up.
But let's get real for a second. Is there anything that Russia can do to further its claim in Svalbard and strengthen its geopolitical position?
Norway has undisputed sovereignty over Svalbard, but debates have arisen since the 1920s regarding how Norway abides by the treaty and enforces its provisions. This criticism has intensified as Norway has implemented stricter environmental regulations and enhanced coordination of research activities. In general, Russia has maintained that Norway has been in breach of the demilitarization law. It states this by pointing out that the Norwegian Coast Guard regularly visits Longyearbyen. This is in addition to the Norwegian Navy's frequent trips to Svalbard to demonstrate Norway's authority and ability in the region. Furthermore, the Norwegian satellite station located on Svalbard, recognized as the world's largest, may be used for military or warlike purposes. While these individual complaints do not explicitly undermine Norway's sovereignty, their combined effect could pose a significant challenge to Norway's adherence to the treaty. Furthermore, if Russia wished to intensify a conflict while maintaining a semblance of plausible deniability, it could leverage these complaints as justification to subtly erode Norway's sovereignty over Svalbard. Not to mention, justify any encroachment by saying that it's only protecting its citizens. A potential escalation in tensions between the Norwegian Coast Guard and Russian vessels operating in the fishing protection zone is another avenue of concern. Although the primary issue centers on Russian fishing vessels, there are growing questions about the activities of all Russian vessels in Norwegian waters. For instance, in January 2022, a crucial subsea cable for information technology on Svalbard was severed after extensive operations by Russian fishing vessels in the area. Following the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipeline in September 2022, this has become increasingly relevant in Norway's security and defense discussions. The situation is further complicated by the fact that both Russian fishing and research vessels have access rights to Norwegian waters, which are difficult to limit. According to law, the burden of proof concerning illegal activities by Russian vessels in Norwegian waters falls on Norwegian authorities. This poses a significant operational and bureaucratic challenge, limiting Norway's ability to deter Russian gray zone operations. While Russian fishers generally accept inspections by the Norwegian Coast Guard, there's concern that in a tense security environment, Russia could accuse Norway of exceeding its jurisdiction if Norwegian authorities inspect and arrest a Russian vessel. This could lead Russia to threaten military force. For the time being, the status quo suits Russia just fine. It is able to extract resources and has access to the Barents Sea. Unless global situation changes for the worse, it should be unlikely that Russia will further antagonize Norway in any way. Russian military action on Svalbard could probably be carried out swiftly, given its proximity to major Russian bases on the Kola Peninsula, and since there is no military defense stationed there. But such action would entail a colossal risk, unleashing a major international conflict. It has been speculated that Allied support might not be forthcoming in such a scenario, arguing that precisely because an occupation can be completed so fast, there is a good chance that NATO members would accept a new status quo and hesitate to escalate a conflict. That may have been the case before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but hopefully it is no longer so. Furthermore, there has not been any report of increased Russian military activity in the areas bordering the Norwegian mainland. On the contrary, since military units stationed on the Kola Peninsula have been transferred to the front line in Ukraine, military activity has been reduced. Russia, threatened by further encroachment of NATO via Finland and Sweden and its perceived weakness in Ukraine, is now, more than ever, looking for opportunities to assert its dominance in the Arctic. Contrary to appearances, Russia is currently at its most vulnerable, a wounded bear. It can merely roar loudly and hope that the ice beneath its feet does not melt away. Next, why not watch my video titled Why Freedom for Belarus Depends on Ukraine? It's one of my best. And this is my Patreon map. Everyone on this map is a legend. Thank you all so much for your support. Geoperspective, out.